Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the Advocacy Day 2021. My name is Nasir Mirzai, and I'm representing the whole bunch of volunteers and school supporters. Good morning, and welcome to Advocacy Day 2021. Thank you to the PTA councils from Los Trampas Creek, Pleasanton, and San Ramon for their volunteering, contributing, and planning this event, and many others. My name is Nasir Mirzai, and I'm hosting these sessions throughout until 11 o'clock today, 11:30, sorry. We have two other sessions, one planned for today at 6 o'clock, and one planned for tomorrow starting at 9 o'clock. We are going to be using Zoom webinar, which is a little bit different than Zoom conference rooms. And the slight difference is you will not be able to chat with others, but if you have any questions, you can definitely put it in chat, and we have a few other members of our team who will be reading the questions if you have any suggestions. And your microphone and videos are turned off, and you will not be able to turn them on unless the moderators want to turn it on for some specific questions you may have for any of our panelists. Thank you for joining us today. We are celebrating the 40th Advocacy Day for Educations. That's correct. That's over 40 years of our activism, dedications, and hard work by so many volunteers. By the way, this is only in East Bay. This could have not happened without an extraordinary amount of time, energy, and planning. The Advocacy Day Committee has been actually meeting since the beginning of January and to plan on what we believe to be a truly informative, we hope, and thought-provoking and motivating day. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible individuals who worked so hard for today to happen. Lisa Gross, Heidi, our communication expert, and our behind-the-scene orchestrator, Supicha Castro, Mercedes Bagger, Kevin Mayo, Velma Wilson, Amy Ricard, Lynn Ashley, and Rachel Hurt. Thank you all for your dedication and your support. We would be remiss if I did not acknowledge two very special committee members who guided, directed, showed endless patience, and gave up themselves to our committee throughout this challenging process. Susanna, you have been extraordinary by your contributions and your dedications to this process and to this committee. And Robin, thank you so much for your effort. You have always been wonderful to work with. We're so fortunate to have you as a member and mentors of our community. I would like to acknowledge the individuals in our audience, yourself, that you have taken time out of your busy schedule to be here. We have many elected officials, educators, and education's administrators, parents, and of course, all of the members of our community who support educations. Let me remind you that PTA mission is to positively impact the lives of our children and families. With that said, we are here today because of our students and their social and emotional well-being, equity, and the role of parents and educators and legislators. If I was a kid, I would know what's been going on and how many people are putting their life and effort into supporting the kids. I would have been so proud of every community members coming together and pulling this thing through. For so many years, we explored what a quality public education should include and what it might take to provide a well-rounded education for all children. I, of course, have not had the fortunate of some of the other members who have been into this process for many, many years. I've been in here only for the last 10 years, and I must tell you that we had never planned, we had never anticipated for what happened this past year. It was beyond imaginations. What a year it has been, but a place we have reached. As we move on with our kids in mind, let us strive to live up the old adage. It is not whether you get knocked down, it is whether you get up. The Advocacy Day, we choose to assign our body, this Advocacy Day, we choose to assign our body the task of moving forward with resiliency. We tell you resiliency is defined as the capacity for a system to tolerate disturbance without collapsing, to withstand shocks. Didn't we feel the shocks? But we withstand it. To rebuild itself when necessary and to improve itself when possible. I believe all of you can testify that this is what we have been doing for the entire last year. So this is our theme and our call to action. Our guest speakers, panelists, and moderators have joined us to guide and help us navigate moving forward with resiliency. So without further delay, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Before I introduce our first speaker, let me also acknowledge that there are 3 different parts into these sessions. We will have Carol Green, and then followed by Dr. Wesley, and then at 10 o'clock, we'll start our superintendent panel. So let me speak of Carol Green. It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Carol Green. Ms. Green has been volunteering in various levels of PTA for more than 20 years. She has been a local unit president at both an elementary school PTA and a high school PTA, a council president, and at 9th district president, serving San Diego and Imperial counties. Ms. Carroll has served on the California State PTA Board of Directors as a vice president for communications and vice president for membership services. She works as a public health advocate and in community media relationship for nonprofit in San Diego County. Ms. Carroll worked for more than 20 years as a radio and television news journalist. And I'm hoping that she will give me some positive feedback on my introductions. She's an active community volunteering, including more than 12 years as a Girl Scout leader and many positions supporting children and art educations. She has a bachelor's degree in communications and journalism from San Diego State University, which I wish I would have gone there also. Green and her husband have 3 children and a dog. Without any further ado, Mr. Green, let me turn the floor to you.
Thank you so much. I think you did a great job, and I need to rewrite that bio. It's starting to make me sound really old. 20 years here and 20 years there. You're like 150 years old by the time you add it all up. But some of them were dual served. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here with all of you and to help to celebrate and open up your Advocacy Day. I love the title of the event, Moving Forward with Resiliency. And I love your definition, but of course, I also looked it up and have a couple of definitions. But I'd like to recognize, first of all, that obviously this has been a difficult year. It's been a challenging, grief-filled, difficult year for all of us in various ways. I mean, there are people that are dealing with financial losses, with job losses, with loved ones losses, with isolation, with mental health issues, with physical health issues, and many more challenges. But we know that when we face challenges, we have 2 choices. We can move forward, or we can crawl back into bed and pull the covers up and wait until it all passes. I'm going to be honest with you. There are days when I crawl back into bed for a little while, and I think it's okay if you do the same, as long as it's not forever. So we're allowed to rest and we're allowed to take a break, but it is time to move forward. So here we are at a crossroads, a moment in time when hope and pain, confusion and optimism, doubt and uncertainty are all present. As a society, we've faced similar circumstances in the past, and I'm married to a history teacher, so he has the statistics of the Spanish flu and World War I at the ready. I'm going to spare you all of those statistics. But I do want to tell you, as president-elect of California State PTA, it gives me great hope and great comfort to know that we've been in situations like this before, and we have emerged stronger. I look at PTA's founding in 1897, at a time when the Industrial Revolution was changing the world. at a time of child poverty and child labor, a time when women didn't even have the right to vote. And yet a couple of moms got together and said, we're going to make some changes. They had the optimism, not excluding the dads. I'm just saying the two founders happened to be moms. They knew something needed to be done and they moved forward. And that's what all of you, all of us are doing today. We're taking a step. We're on this webinar. We're going to learn new tools. We're going to learn new things. We're going to hopefully be inspired, invigorated, and supporting each other to move forward. So today, briefly, I'm going to talk to you about some lessons that we've learned, some practical tips for moving forward, and some of the visions of California State PTA and PTAs and parent groups throughout California and the nation as we move into a time of hope and rebuilding. In moments of crisis, great leaders are born, and that's you. Each and every one of you, whether you're a parent, a volunteer, a PTA leader, an administrator, a student, whoever you are the leaders of tomorrow. And we are dealing with challenging times, which gives us great opportunities as well as things to deal with. So resilience and resiliency are interesting words. We've heard one definition. We know that children that are resilient have better outcomes statistically and later in life. But what does it mean for a community to be resilient? What does it mean when our advocates are resilient? Well, resiliency is defined as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Also, the second definition is when an object springs back into shape after it's crushed. Well, I don't know about you, but many of us feel like we have been crushed by the past year, year and a half. And maybe we're not feeling like we're springing back as fast as we would like. But you should know that springing back doesn't always happen fast. It doesn't always happen in a straight line, and there are likely to be setbacks and detours along the way. But through the setbacks and the detours, we learn the lessons. So what are the lessons we've learned, both big picture and specific for PTAs and parent groups and schools? Well, the first lesson I've learned, which it's not that I haven't learned it before, but this one hit us over the head, is that you cannot plan for everything. As Nassar mentioned in the introduction, we didn't think this year was coming, and we certainly didn't expect it to look like this. And I guarantee you can ask any teacher, principal, parent, student, person in the world, and they will say, we didn't expect this. But here we are. And you get things you don't expect in life. That is something that is for sure. You can't plan for everything. And learning to be flexible is a skill that many of us may have learned. We've also adapted and learned about new tools, maybe faster than we had before. E-commerce is booming. Certainly Zoom and internet connections, teleconferencing is happening at a faster pace than ever before. I mean, my parents and my 5 siblings and I got on a Zoom call last Easter, and we could see this much of my mom's head through most of the Zoom call, but it was an interesting experience, and we all learned from it. And PTAs, parent groups, and schools are learning how to use these tools too. We're also learning about inclusion and barriers and what those things look like as we examine our own social network and see what changes can be made. Sometimes in troubling times, the ails of society and the challenges become more prominent, and it's an opportunity to examine those. We also have learned a lot about the importance of mental health, community, our physical health, and how to support each other in challenging times. So it's important that as we move forward, we don't forget these lessons. And as schools open up and our society returns to some sense of normality, that we don't leave behind the people that we've learned about, the people that we care about, and the lessons that we've learned. Dealing with change and loss is an inevitable part of life. So here are a couple of practical tips that we can all take away. Psychology experts say that it's important to reframe your thoughts. Be realistic. Don't over-catastrophize I probably said that wrong. Don't think of just the catastrophes that are coming about. Think about ways that you can deal with things and focus on what you can change, what you can tackle, and what you can deal with. It's also important for those of us that are parents or teachers to model this for our students. Also, seek support. Sharing with supportive friends and asking for help when you're overcommitted or you can't do it that day, it's okay. And we actually learn that people like being asked for their help. This helps us build friendships and bonds and networking circles that will serve long after this immediate crisis is over. Also model this for your children. Talking about feelings and asking for support is an important thing that we can all do as individuals. Focus on what you can control. So many things we can't control, but here we are today on this webinar learning about how we can advocate for our children. And we will all probably go away with lots of tools in our pocket of things that we can do. Focusing on the things you can do and making a positive difference will help us both mentally and practically. And also just want to remind everyone, go ahead and rest, but don't quit. We need you. And that means we need you healthy, mentally healthy, and strong. So go ahead and rest, take a break, crawl back under the covers every once in a while. But we need you, so please don't quit. Martin Luther King Jr. said, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, keep moving forward. And John Wooden, the famous UCLA basketball coach, who I went to high school with his grandchildren, said, if we fail to adapt, we fail to move forward. So the lessons we can all learn are those of adaptation, of flexibility, of inclusion, and of how to move forward even in a crisis. And like our children, adults who learn to be resilient, who learn to bounce back, are more successful and have better outcomes. So in PTA, let's just sum it up. We have learned that it's important to remain relevant. We need to include everyone, all of our parents, all of our aunts, uncles, community members, our administration. Everyone is invited to the table. That's how we make our best decisions, and that's how we have our best outcomes. We've learned that communication doesn't happen in one way. It's not just talking to people in person. It's not just emails. It's not just text message. It's a lot of different platforms. And so we want to be out there communicating in the way people are hearing it. So we'll adapt and we'll change. Hopefully you all will adapt and change, and together we'll move forward. All of our children need protecting. And I mean all of our children, particularly our most vulnerable children. So like a broken bone or a muscle, and I'm no fitness expert, but I do know that when you go to the gym, you work out and then you rest and then the muscle rebuilds. You're tearing it down and you're building it back up. And that is what this year has been, or year and a half to 2 years has been for all of us. It doesn't mean that our schools are going to magically reopen and life is going to go back to normal. It's going to be a new normal, but it's going to be it's going to be a new life that includes all of us being part of the decision-making, advocating for our children, working together and supporting each other. And I'm so thrilled to be here with you all as we start this journey together. Thank you very much. Let's move forward, because that's all we can do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. I really appreciate it. Thanks for inspiring. Thanks for volunteering for so many years. Thanks for dedicating yourself to kids and to our children. When I was looking at your profile also, I added up the numbers. So this does not show an age. This shows an expertise and experiences and multitasking every single moments of their life. So thank you so much. And I appreciate your contributions to our committee. Thank you. So now allow me to introduce our next keynote speaker, in fact, Dr. Wesley Smith. I don't know if there is anyone that I know personally that has so much depth into our public school and has been rooted up from all the way from being an elementary teacher to a high school to professor in universities, as well as being a coach and superintendent in multiple school districts. That's an incredible background and experiences. And of course, Dr. Smith is also an executive director of Associations of California School Administrators, the largest school leadership group in the nations. In fact, ACCA, ACSA is foremost a champion for a state more than 6 million students. Dr. Smith understands the process and the public schools and how to influence in public educations. He believes in bold new features for ACSA and ensuring it is the most influential voice in public educations for years to come. Changes in the standards taught and tested in California, a new school funding formula, and redesign of education's accountability system will require ACSA leadership. Dr. Smith is uniquely qualified and posed to lead that charge to protect the presence and the future of our students. As I just mentioned, these are just a few of Dr. Smith's accomplishments and his background. But there is a lot more in our webpage if you'd like to see his bio, as well as, of course, he has his own websites and a whole bunch of YouTube videos if you get a chance to watch them, please. So it is my honor, it is my pleasure, and to introduce Dr. Wesley Smith. So Dr. Smith, thank you very much and welcome.
Nasser, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I think the only thing I would add, and it's hard to add to that lengthy introduction, I've asked my team to shorten it, apologies, is that I'm also a parent of students in K-12 education, higher education, and graduate school. And I think that's important because today I come to you as one of you, experiencing a lot of the same experiences, not that we can appropriate one another's experiences, but sharing a lot of the similar experiences over the past 15 months. Let me also thank the team that's put this together. Nasser has others that are working with him, and what a great idea. What an important activity. And so thank you to all of you that spent your time volunteering again to do this important work. And by the way, President-elect Green, how powerful is that? I almost wanted to say, look, you're a professional broadcaster. Let's let her take my time. She's talking about all the right stuff. She says it professionally. And I'm just an educator and a dad, not a professional broadcaster. But I'll do the best to share some of the things that we've learned with you, and her point about lessons learned. And we didn't talk about this. It's really what I want to share with you today. But before I get to that, I'm just grateful to be a part of this. As I said, it's an important event. It's necessary. And I'm just honored to even be asked to be with you today. I'm grateful for PTA. I've had such a strong relationship as executive director with PTA since I started this job. Of course, as a school administrator, district administrator, I had a strong relationship with our parent groups, PTA most often. But here in this role, we've worked really closely together with your executive director and your state leadership. I've had a chance to keynote some of the state conferences. Your presidency has been on my Facebook Live talking about what parents need and deserve and how they can benefit schools during the pandemic. And then we've worked on legislation together. And so thank you, PTA at the local and state level, for being such a great ally and partner. I'm grateful also to serve the amazing educators on this broadcast, this virtual conference, the teachers who are my heroes, the administrators who I support daily. These folks have done Herculean tasks in the most challenging and unprecedented times. They were my heroes before the pandemic. They are even more so now, and it's just an honor for me to serve them, to be a part of this work with them. And then to all of you, the parents and caregivers. This pandemic has been challenging for us all, certainly for our students, most importantly, for our systems, for our educators. Our parents have done, well, an amazing juggling act, right? I mean, how many of us are doing our childcare? We're doing our work from home. We are helping support the education of our students from home. We're connecting with our family members. I think about my own son, who started the pandemic as a junior in high school, will finish the pandemic as a senior in high school. And during that time, he applied to 23 colleges in musical theater, performing arts. By the way, I know how important the arts are to PTA, and I got to say, I share that conviction that arts are necessary, that they are a great hook and engaging activity for our students when we look at a whole child, whole education approach. In any event, my son was applying to colleges from home instead of going to schools and singing and dancing and acting. We did it from our kitchen. We had to build a structure with PVC pipe and figure out how to use Zoom to broadcast and to record, and how to do a green screen. These are things we hadn't done before. And you've done those same things. And so all that to say, I just appreciate you more than I can convey. And thank you for everything you've done to support your students and public education in California. Typically, when someone asks me to come on and do a state presentation, it's about what's wrong in the state, policies, issues, legislation that we do or don't like. And it would be easy to talk about those things. This last year has been, as we said, a challenge, polarizing politics, the debates over what we should and shouldn't do relative to reopening, distance learning, what is safe, what isn't safe. But we're not going to talk about that today. We're not going to look back to illuminate or lift up the challenges. We're going to focus on what I call silver linings. Silver linings, or building our best future. The future really that our students have always deserved, that we've always wanted to provide for them, but for whatever reason, we didn't. Here is our opportunity. And these silver linings aren't my ideas. As I've communicated with professionals, with parents and caregivers around the state, with educators around the state, and with students around the state, these are things that I've been collecting for some time, because I believe metacognition is one of the keys to learning. That we must think about what we have learned. And we must not only think about it and process it, we have to apply it. As I tell my team, shame on us if we exit the pandemic as we entered it. We must learn as we are, as President Green said, these lessons learned. And more importantly, we have to apply them. We have to be better for our students. And that's why I say, let's build our best future. Some of our state leaders talk about building better back. Maybe you've heard that phrase. And no offense if some of our panelists use that, if some of our keynotes use that. I just don't use that phrase because I don't like the back part. I don't think we want to look back and try to build on to that, almost like the Winchester Mystery House, right? Discombobulated, not really cohesive. Let's build better. Let's build our better future for our students, for our communities, and for our stakeholders. And so that's the focus here today. And to do that, I want to share some buckets of learning, these silver linings, if you will. I'm going to talk about the power of virtual, focusing on what works, whole child and whole adult support, the power of relationships, and I really want to spend some time on that. The importance of clear expectations. We will talk about funding, and I know that's something you talk about a lot, but I'll make some comments or share some thoughts that I think we ought to keep in front of us. And then wellness. As I said, adults in particular today, parents and caregivers like yourselves have been stretched thin, at least, sometimes broken. And so how do we prioritize our wellness And I want to finish up with that today and share some of my own experiences in that area. And this was titled, where is California education heading? I think we should change the focus because to me that sounds passive. I could share where other people want to take public education and then project where it's headed. But I think the power today, tomorrow, in these sessions is that we decide where we want to take education, and we don't let it head that direction. We direct it, right? We empower ourselves as systems, as stakeholders, to once again create that system that once and for all prioritizes the rights and needs of all students. And that's the powerful opportunity we have. And I think to get into these things, and this is one of the priorities of PTA, one of the many reasons why I love the work that you do, you focus on equity. You focus on the inequities in the system, inequities within your systems, and you confront them. And so I just want to start laying a foundation that before the pandemic, these inequities have been historical. They have been persistent, and they have been relatively unchanged. Now, that doesn't mean to say that there aren't great systems out there where people have done amazing work. You have, your districts have, your counties have. I'm talking about the system as a whole. And so it was disproportionately affecting some of our students, communities, and subgroups before the pandemic. And the pandemic only exacerbated that disparity. We know that within some of our communities, families, subgroups, that during the pandemic, they had to skip, and this is on the average, 1 of 3 meals, that many of them are housing displaced, that they are the groups and communities that suffered the highest rates of unemployment. And we know that all of those things, food insecurities, housing insecurity, work insecurity, affects not only the mental health, the wellness of adults, it does students as well. And so the pandemic has absolutely exacerbated these inequities in the system. And we have to take that into account as we, right, as we proactively create the future that our students and communities deserve. Let me talk about the power of virtual, and these aren't ranked in order of importance. I have to admit, if I were ranking them, I'd start with relationships and importance, but I want to start with the power of virtual because it sets the stage, I believe, for how we get to and improve even some of those relationships in new and innovative ways. But if we don't think that we've grown in this regard, I have to tell you, I was talking to a superintendent colleague of mine. He was laughing. He has an 80-year-old mother who didn't do much with technology. He had to help with email. She struggled with that. But at the beginning of the pandemic, they wanted to try to connect their family because they knew that isolationism or being isolated would be a real threat to their family's health and wellness. So they started to do these Zoom family get-togethers. How many of us have done those, right? And so he had to walk his mother through it, get her up to speed. And after a while, after these regular meetings, she would show up. At first, she had a virtual background of stacks of toilet paper. And then at one point, she was in an Irish pub. Not literally, of course, because, the state and world were shut down. They were closed. But he said to her, "Mom, why an Irish pub?" And she said, "Well, sometimes when you're talking on our family get-togethers, you go a little long and it's a little boring. So I thought this would spice it up a little bit." And when I think about that, I mean, that isn't a reality that we had before the pandemic. We have grown, we have innovated, we have evolved because of this opportunity, if you will, we were given. Remember, Winston Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, I wouldn't call this a good crisis. I can't assign the word good when we've seen the amount of death and suffering caused by this. But I will say that this pandemic is a crisis and an opportunity for us to get better, and we have. One of the ways is in our virtual connections. When we talk about inequities, we have to talk about technology infrastructure. We know that many of our families didn't have access to devices and couldn't connect to the internet. And so when this pandemic hit, our digital divide, the expanse of it, was increased. And so what happened? Well, we came together. We started to work together and to collaborate. The State Superintendent of Public Instruction and the first partner put together a group of business leaders, community leaders, and they went out and they got 70,000 devices within the first several months and 100,000 hotspots. Districts and communities like yours, PTAs, use some of their resources, fundraising, and business connections to provide devices and connectivity in your districts. And so we were able to, and don't get me wrong, we're not there. We haven't bridged the digital divide, but we've certainly minimized that distance from the beginning of the pandemic. And that's great work. That's a great silver lining. And that's one of those things that as we talk about advocacy, I would just put in front of you and PTA, we must continue to advocate that we address that digital divide, that we must provide more devices and more connectivity around the state so that everybody has access to these virtual innovations. Well, as people started to connect, we addressed the virtual divide with infrastructure. We started to make new connections. And so what did we learn? What are those silver linings? Well, think about this. How many of you, your students, teachers that you chat with, administrators, used the terms or knew how to use Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Google Hangout, etc., etc. These were relatively new concepts to a lot of people, or just words, but now we've gained experience. Our teachers have used these tools. They've, out of necessity, become proficient in these tools. Our students are better using these tools. Our parents are better using these tools. And that is a great benefit to the system moving forward. And if you don't think that we've all evolved in this regard or grown in this regard, think about this. How many of us have heard this so often now that it's a part of our daily lexicon almost? You're muted, or can you hear me? Can you hear me? Your feet is frozen, or this is one of my favorites. Hey, you aren't wearing pants. Maybe you don't experience that one, but it's amazing to me. We, as we say, there's a lot of business up top and casual on the bottom as we do these presentations. I've had several times being on with some folks, and the camera's not pointed at their face, and we have to remind them, hey, if you didn't want us to see your sweats, move your camera up a little bit. But all this to say, this is a part of what we do. This is a part of our reality now. And as we've made these virtual connections, as we've gotten better at these things, what do our educators say we've learned? One of our superintendents said this: our experience in going the extra yard to meet kids where they are during the pandemic will provide a great model moving forward. I think that our interventions and responses to student needs will be robust in the future. You see, because of this challenge and our innovative approaches, our workarounds, we've learned how to go meet students where they are. How powerful is that? Joe Johnson, when he used to be at the Dana Center in Austin, used to talk about the chicken coop model of education, where we have someone that has the feed bag of knowledge and they throw the food out and they're in a pen, and the hungry chickens eat and the ones who aren't hungry don't eat. Well, our students have always deserved better than that. So now we're going to get out of the chicken coop. We're going to not just throw out food. We're going to go to that student who's hungry, and we're going to feed them where they are with knowledge and with supports. Another superintendent said, we strengthened our K-12 online school program and made it more accessible to a broader set of kids. See, we've expanded those tools, the way that we connect those parents, students to learning. Another one, and I think this is powerful, we've seen great progress in special education, in meeting the needs of our students with special needs. We've seen districts all around the state say that they're able now to bring in outside specialists more easily. They're better able to increase parent attendance and move, beyond scheduling, because that's such a challenge, and get to actually meeting because of the flexibility that this provides. And so we're better able to meet some of the special needs of some of our dearest and unfortunately systemically forgotten students. So this is encouraging. And this is one of those things, as we advocate moving forward, let's continue with what we've learned. Let's apply it. Let's not go back to the old normal. Let's go to our new future that is more engaging and more accessible for all. Speaking of that, and this is a big one, and I'm preaching to the choir now, but this is important. We have done a better job in systems around the state, according to parents and school officials, in parent caregiver engagement. I mentioned a second ago some of those barriers to engagement. And what these virtual connections have done have allowed us to eliminate some of those barriers. Barriers like childcare, work. Some of us are working. It's hard to get out of that. Travel time, meals, providing meals, et cetera, et cetera. When I was in Morgan Hill as superintendent there, we had a high population of Latinx families. And when I would invite them to events, we couldn't get them to events at district offices at schools. And when I asked the community why that was, they had a fear of government buildings for obvious reasons. So we found a way to go out into the community, meet with them, and participation skyrocketed. Well, now we can do those things virtually. We can eliminate barriers. We're seeing greater participation by parents and caregivers in board meetings, parent-teacher conferences, DLAC meetings, and as I said, IEPs. So a silver lining is, because of what we're learning, what we've learned, we can increase engagement and participation. We're also asking you what you think. Right? Now, again, if you're sitting there going, hey, they haven't asked me, I'm saying as a system, right? Or as systems around the state. They're doing parent polling and feedback with applications like Padlet or Google Forms or SurveyMonkey. You see, they're not just inviting parent and caregiver participation, they're polling it. They're looking at the feedback and hopefully responding to it. Systems are recording their meetings, what they're sharing, so that parents and caregivers can look at it when it's appropriate for them. They're creating playlists of information. So if you're at work or you have to do childcare, you can go to that web presence and find those recordings, those playlists. And then in professional development is often expensive because you have to go somewhere, you have to pay for that, you have to do it during the day. And now we're realizing that with these virtual connections, we can do professional development for educators when it's appropriate for them at a lower cost in an ongoing nature. And this is powerful. So these are just some of the virtual connections and lessons therein, silver linings that we must apply moving forward. We can't go back to what we did before. Number two, we focused on what works. Relationships are primary. Engagement is essential. Folks are focusing now because you can't focus on everything. And so what they've done is they've focused on what's most important in schools, in learning opportunities, knowledge, application of knowledge, and collaboration. Think about how we've used these innovations to bring students together without traveling to collaborate. And they've done this knowledge, application, collaboration, instead of just tasks. It's less about tasks and it's more about knowledge. That's powerful. And that's something we need to take with us as we move into the future. Another is grading. People are looking at grading very, very differently. They had to. The work is different. The interactions are different. The grading had to be different. One superintendent said, we're now looking at what students know and are able to do versus compliance and completion. As a parent, that's powerful for me. Right? As an educator, that's where we've always wanted to go. And this has forced us in that direction. And that's a good thing. Restorative grading. We know about restorative practices. Districts are committed to restorative grading, making sure that it fairly and accurately reflects what all students know and are able to do. And then this was powerful. One superintendent said to me, we are no longer grading privilege. For those of you that are equity minded, let me say this again. We are no longer grading privilege. And that too is something we must take forward. We talk about the whole child support and whole adult support. Let's not forget our teachers, our classified folks, our administrators, for heaven's sakes. They need whole adult support, as our students do as well. But what we've noticed is in this pandemic, our students, we recognize their stress, their food insecurities, and all those things that we've talked about. And so to address their needs, they must be whole child supports. We talked about that in the past. But this pandemic has made that essential, and it is essential as we move past the pandemic. And we oftentimes make these false choices. Is it social emotional learning or is it academics? Well, that's a false choice, okay? Dr. Cantor, who's done a lot of work with us and done research on brain learning, says that it's not either or. Successful, effective education takes into account all of it. It takes into account safety, health, mental health, social, emotional, and cognitive development, academic skill focus, development of student identity, and recognizing and developing student agency. That's a whole child learning system. And that's what we have to demand and advocate when we come out of this pandemic, as we move into certainly this summer, next fall, and beyond. Let me talk about the power of relationships, because I told you that's important. And I've said before, the parent engagement piece, we've seen some improvements around the state, and therein we've seen parent empowerment increase, caregiver empowerment increase, and we've seen relationships improved between parents and caregivers and their schools. We've seen improvements in labor management relationships out of necessity. They had to work together in successful systems. They had to collaborate. They had to practice leadership from the middle, and they did, and they succeeded. And that's something we have to move forward. We have to demand that we work on and prioritize labor management relationships after the pandemic. But then let's talk about students. We all know that relationships are primary, that they are the most important thing with our students. We've heard the quote, kids don't care what we know until they know that we care. And how do we show them that we care? Have we always prioritized that? The great educators have. You know them. The teachers that have most impacted the lives of your students started with those relationships, maintained those relationships. And it was because of those relationships that your students were thriving. Pedro Noguera, who is the dean of the USC Russell School of Education, said recently on a movie that was made by All It Takes, that relationships must come before content and curriculum. Absolutely. Relationships before content and curriculum. And when we ask students, and when All It Takes asked students, what have you seen differently during the pandemic? They said, my teacher cares more about me now. My teacher's asking me about me. They didn't ask that before. They had to figure out ways, teachers did, to connect with students and engage with them. And the students recognized the difference. Students were encouraged by improved relationships with their teachers in these successful systems. And that's something we have to take forward. And if you don't believe anecdotally or what these folks have said, Let's look at the research. When Dr. Cantor's looked at brain research and the impact of a calm brain on learning, how do we achieve a calm brain? Well, it's through three things. She calls it the new 3 R's: relationships, routines, resiliency. Those 3 things promote a calm brain. A calm brain promotes learning. She talks too about cortisol and oxytocin, that these hormones, cortisol being damaging, causes stress, causes fear and anxiety. It's produced as we experience those things, and it's powerful. Oxytocin is a more positive hormone, and it comes from relationships, from trust, from love, from happiness. And the great news about these hormones is that oxytocin is shown in research to be more powerful than cortisol, that they affect the same receptors. So what does that mean? That we can protect students at a cellular level from future stress, from the adverse effects of stress, trauma as well, by increasing oxytocin through relationships. So relationships matter, resiliency matters, and we can absolutely create that for them. And all it takes is a focus on that relationship built on trust. Dr. Kidd in the marshmallow research, you'll remember of years ago when she gave students marshmallows and said, you can eat those or you can wait and I'll give you more later. Some ate them, some didn't. They postponed gratification and waited and got more marshmallows. And then she thought, what else is at play here? And so she went into those same students and said, or a different group of students rather, and said, I've got some crayons, they're broken. Pretty soon I'm going to come back, I'm going to bring you whole crayons, more crayons that are whole. For half the students, she didn't bring back whole crayons. The other half she brought, as she said, whole crayons, and then reinstituted the marshmallow experiment. Asked the students to wait, postpone gratification, and she'd bring them more. Well, guess what? The students who didn't get the whole crayons ate their marshmallows. Those who got the whole crayons didn't eat their marshmallows. They were able to suspend gratification. Why? Because of trust. When we have trusting relationships with our students, it benefits them. It allows them to persevere, to wait. That's important for us. And we can't lose that as we move back into our next normal, the best normal that we are going to proactively create, right? So relationships are important. Clear expectations. I mentioned that. We've been hurt by these expectations that are all over the board. We must demand as parents, as caregivers, as members of the system, that as we go into next year, what are we expected to do? The governor is looking at the June 15th date. What does distance learning look like? What is allowable in a hybrid next year? We must know these things before next fall. So we must demand that there's clarification around these nuances. Funding, there's a lot of one-time funding right now, and this is something that PTA does all the time. You're loud about this, but one-time funding isn't enough. We have to have a stable, ongoing funding mechanism. I have to give your executive director, Sherry Griffith, a shout out on this. She was the first voice in the Education Coalition to put this agenda forward. And others have gotten in line now, but we have to demand more than just getting in line. We have to do something. Our students deserve better. If we're 43rd out of 50 in per pupil spending in California, that's not okay. I think it's criminal. My kids, not perfect. They're better than 43 out of 50. They're good kids. They deserve more from our system. So do yours. And then wellness. We started a little late, and so I'm kind of rushing through this because I want us to finish on time. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. But your wellness matters. Balance is a misnomer. You can't balance things because you have to have equal weights, and they're not equal weights all the time, but alignment's important. Some things that we can do: breathe. And I know you're thinking, I breathe all the time. Nah, breathe. Really, give yourself time. Schedule breathing every day. Navy SEALs do it. They call it rescue breathing. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out for 4 minutes. They breathe all the way to the bottom of their lungs. They do it as a practice to be experts. I figure if the Navy SEALs can do it, we can do it. Schedule time to breathe. Find your ocean. I have a buddy that says every day he gets home from work, he's stressed. He goes to the ocean, he puts his toes in the water, and then he breathes. Where's your ocean? find your ocean. What do you do to prioritize you? You matter. It's one of my buddies tells me 90% of success is showing up. If you don't show up, you can't make a difference for your students. So how do you show up? Find your ocean. And then I talked about virtual connections. So this is going to sound a bit maybe ironic, but at some point we got to put down our phones, get away from our computers, disconnect and engage, disconnect from the internet, engage with our loved ones, show them that in our conversations, they're more important than the device in our hand, the computer in front of us, the TV streaming Netflix. Disconnect and engage. If we breathe, if we'll find our ocean, if we'll disconnect and engage with our loved ones, we'll find better wellness. We'll be able to better support our students and the systems that should support them. I raced through that to make sure that I finished. I know there might be some questions. I don't know if we have time for them, if we adjusted or not. But again,
Dr.
let me thank
West,
you all.
yeah, definitely. Wow. If you have a YouTube channel, let me be one of the members and join in. And if you let me know where you are hanging out, I definitely want to hang out and then that wisdom. So there's actually there's a few questions, but one question particularly, in fact, when you mentioned about leaving the devices and such. So all of our board members and board meetings have been broadcasted and streamed live during this pandemic. So what's your opinion about continue that sessions and agendas even after we go in person to continue streaming those sessions and those seminars and meetings, or what's your opinion? Just curious.
Yeah, and again, that's a great question. And I can't speak for superintendents or boards and what they think is best for their communities. But in general, this is a lesson learned that we can increase participation as we provide options for folks. So I can tell you at AXA, when we have board meetings from now on, when we have conferences, we are going to have a virtual option as well to accommodate for those who can't be in person. So we are going to have, if you will, hybrid focus moving forward. We're going to go back to being in person. As I like to say, we're going to go back to wearing pants, right? And then we're going to let people who can't be there virtually. Engagement, participation makes all of us better, makes the system stronger.
Great. We have other panelists and individuals on the waiting list, Dr. West. So again, we truly enjoyed your wealth of knowledge and your informations as an educator, professional, and of course as a parent. Sorry, I forgot to mention that in the beginning and opening. But we definitely respect that, and we definitely recognize and appreciate it. Your inside information and your observations is truly inspiring, and we definitely appreciate you participating, and you're helping us with this advocacy day. And your message was exactly what the doctor ordered. It's not really looking at the past, but rather than what do we do and what we have learned moving forward. So again, on behalf of everyone, on behalf of our entire estate, I want to appreciate everything that you have done and everything that you do, Dr. West. So thank you so much.
Yeah, my honor. Thank you.
Right. So we have we've been fortunate that we have some of the best superintendents, and in fact, we have some of them online today as a panel that we'll be discussing different schools. So with that, we were looking for someone that has a good wealth of knowledge and insight, and being able to articulate and thought-provoking questions, and being able to fairly moderate some of the most influential and impactful leaders of our school systems, and students and teachers, of course. So that finding that right balance and right choice wasn't really that hard, since we knew John Festerwald, and he has proven time and again of his ability to lead questions and with key and important education leaders and get to the bottom of unanswered questions. John, we have worked with him, and he has been part of the Advocacy Day for many years. And he also joined in EdSource in 2012. And for 3 years before that, he was actually founder and editor of the Educated Guest website, a source of California education policy reporting, sponsored by Silicon Valley Education's foundations. Prior to that, for 11 years, John wrote editorials for Mercury News. I think that the Mercury News still is live and published in San Jose with a focus on educations. He worked as a reporter, news editor, and opinion editor for 3 newspapers in New Hampshire before receiving a Knight Fellowship at Stanford University in 1997. His wife is a retired teacher, and their daughter is a neurology resident at the University of California, Los Angeles School of Medicine. So without any further ado, I want to introduce John. Thank you very much, John, for joining us.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Nasser, with that. Yeah, with that humbling introduction, let's get on with our panel. And I'm pleased to have 4 great superintendents here. And hour and a half seems like a long time, but if you divide it up, it's only 22 minutes each, and we have a lot to cover. So let me quickly introduce them. You have the bios with you, I believe. So you know your superintendent, I know. So Bruce Burns has been the superintendent of Moraga Elementary District since 2010, and he was a principal for years in the district. Before that, he has coached youth lacrosse, which is a favorite sport of the Festerwald household. And David Haglund has been superintendent of Pleasanton Unified for 4 years. He was deputy superintendent of educational services, and he was the chief academic officer for the Santa Ana Unified District. And where I know from speaking with him in the past, he was one of the pioneers in the use of technology in schools. John Malloy has been, is this your second year, right, John, if I'm not, as superintendent of San Ramon Valley Unified? It's the largest district among us today with 36 schools. Before that, he was the director of education or superintendent of Toronto District School Board, and it's the eighth largest district in North America. And John Nickerson has been superintendent at Acalanes High School District for 11 years and been in the district 26 years as a teacher and administrator, and has put through 2 of his own children as a sign of confidence in the district through the district. And one is, I think, graduating soon. So welcome, all of you. I appreciate and joining us today. So let me just start off by reading some. I read an article in the Times this week that jumped out at me, and it was about superintendents, and it was by Dan Domenech, and he said, it's been incredibly difficult for superintendents. They're in communities where half the parents want schools open and half of them want schools shut. Wherever you decide, it's a no-win situation because you're going to have people mad at you. And so I just wanted to take stock of you gentlemen after 14 months, and that's not your only problem for sure, logistics that you faced and the issues that have been raised already today with mental health and emotional health of your students, finding substitute teachers. I don't need to tell you all the issues, but I want to take stock. How are you doing at this point? Are you exhausted? Who wants to go first? The teacher will call. John, go first.
Well, since there's 2 of us that are John, actually 3 on this panel, I'll jump in.
Thank you, John.
You get to go next. But actually, this is my first year in the San Ramon Valley Unified School District. But I can say that when this pandemic started, I was the superintendent, director, we called it, in the Toronto schools. And no matter where you are on the globe, I can honestly say that we all, I think, pretty much experienced some pretty important realities with this whole past year. And John, I think you said it best, because I would say in the 33 years that I've been doing this important education work, in the last 17 in an assistant superintendent or superintendent role, and I want to say that I'm a former counselor by training, this has been a year where the emotions and the perspectives and the diverse opinions regarding the pandemic itself regarding how we should be responding to it, regarding the requirements that we've been expected to follow, and who has the authority to assert those requirements. And frankly, we all care about kids and we want to do the best for our students. And again, each and every day, I knew that the inbox would be filled with completely different views regarding what we should do. And the perspective my cabinet working with our board of trustees took on was this one. At times like this, we can't lead by pressure, because if we were, we would get nowhere. And so we went right to the place of what does it mean to lead with principles, PLES, so that we could at least speak as clearly as we could about the decisions that we made. And that's where obviously starting with safety and making some decisions that we would follow, for example, public health guidance rigidly, and I use that term intentionally. And then we would do our very best to listen as closely as we could to all of our stakeholders and partners, knowing that at the end of the day, there was something that brought us all together, which was the care of our kids, support of our kids, and doing the best we can for kids. But I will say that it has been a challenge like no other in my experience.
John Nickerson, go ahead. How you feeling?
So, Dr. Malloy, thank you for that. And I think we try to anchor ourselves on that principle of safety, and that's been guiding us through this. But what's made it particularly challenging, I think, John, we didn't see a 50-50. And I'm going to cite Bruce Burns sitting on this panel, the rule of thirds, which we often encounter with anything in education. A third are with you, a third are resisting, and a third are kind of in between. And that's kind of what we saw with this. A third are open the schools yesterday, a third were it's not safe, and a third were waiting to see what was happening. And I think what really complicated this, and not to anyone's fault, it's, this was a novel virus that we were learning about in the spring, developing protocol and guidance through the summer, and then through the fall that was modifying, and then some big changes in January. And so while we're trying to develop what's best for all our kids, when opinions differ, then you complicate that by, changing guidance, changing science, developing science, and then a whole lot of misinformation out there. It was really, really challenging. We're used to dealing with different opinions as we're always looking to get better as schools and bringing change initiatives. But this was particularly challenging with the changing guidance, changing rules. I know Dr. Malloy made some decisions, and literally moments later, there were changes in the CDPH guidance. And they had to figure out workarounds, and we all went through that. And so I just add that was one thing that really complicated. It wasn't just different opinions in the community. It was developing science, changing guidelines, and misinformation out there.
Thank you, John. Bruce?
I concur with both prior comments, and especially resonate with the lead by pressure comment, because that was a theme through all of this, which has been incredibly challenging, as you both, Dr. Malloy and Dr. Nickerson, described. So how am I doing? When I think about that question, I think about how am I doing today based on what's occurred over time. With kids back in school, we're seeing signs of normalcy. Some work routines are becoming a little bit more routine, which is a blessing after a tumultuous 14, 15 months. But I want to point to two things, actually three things. One is the work that we do is often isolating. And one of the positive outcomes upon reflection over the past year is working cooperatively and frequently with other superintendents. Contra Costa County superintendents met every week as a group and with our county health officers, which has been a huge support. And then beyond that, we worked even more collaboratively in smaller networks. Walla Marinda, along with Dr. Malloy, met often as well, just collaborating among ourselves. So the work that is typically more isolating was far more collaborative, which was a huge benefit to all of our districts and ultimately our kids. And the other thing I want to mention, while you're asking about our positions as superintendents upon reflection over the past year, I think we need to bring in our school boards to the discussion as well, because we work as a governance team. They went through much of what we did as well. And while our superintendent collaborative was instrumental in our well-being, and I can speak to that within our area, along with San Ramon, our boards have also been a foundation for us to lean on, because they've gone through much of what we did as well. And I think their vision, their strength, their support to us has provided us the support in moving forward through these tumultuous times. So better today, John, than the last couple of months. I read the same article this morning, and that introduction that you read is very accurate for what we experienced this year.
Thank you. David, perhaps I'll widen it. How are you and your staff and your teachers doing at this point in the year?
Yeah, I appreciate you actually widening it in that regard. I think, just a simple answer to your question, I'm beat up. I mean, I'm tired. This has been a rough year. But that's no different of a feeling that every single one of my teachers and staff members are feeling. We have worked as hard as we know how to work to make sure that we're delivering services in a way that's the safest for both the adults and the students in the organization. So, but being tired is not a bad thing. I mean, it just means that you've been exerting a good deal of energy. And I would expect that every single one of us on this panel has got a bit of tiredness going on in us. And we've reached way beyond our collective areas of expertise, I think, with regards to this novel virus that hit us. And so we've had to think in ways that we probably have never been called on to think, and to react in ways that we've never been called on to react. That's the same for our teachers. I think about each of the shifts that we've made in Pleasanton to try to deliver more services and get more students back on campus. That burden was very heavy onto the part of our teachers. And so they have delivered, they have stood up when it was time to stand up. Same thing with our classified staff. When we shut down for a week to be able to deliver technology to the homes and hotspots to the home, the classified staff was working on that side while the teachers were engaged in professional development, so that when that next week arose, we were able to open back up remotely at the beginning of this mess. But none of us thought that we would be re-engaging and doing this similar work in the full school year of 2021. And so it's just been, as others have described, a series of shifts based on guidance that's totally out of our control. And it's been a challenge. There's no question about that. I will say that one of the positives that has come along in the past couple of months for Alameda County is that we've seen the counties aligned to the state guidance. I think one of the most frustrating parts for myself, and I'll even probably call John into the mix here, is our districts come very close to each other and our employees live in each other's district. And so when Contra Costa County would go in one particular direction, but Alameda would go in a different one, it introduced so much confusion into the dialogue. So I was very glad to see the county start to align and the state to take a more active role in leadership. But as others have said, I'm also really, really glad to see kids back on campus, to be able to stand on the sidelines at a football game and just to see hope and reignition of passions in classrooms. So I'll stop with that.
Good, thanks. And one more question before, I know there's a lot to talk about what's going to happen in the summer and the next year, but before we do that, I just thought we'd take stock of what you've learned and over the past year practices that you plan to apply moving forward, or insights that you've had. Bruce, you mentioned a more cooperating, and whether you can make that part of moving ahead. And whoever wants to respond, what have you learned from this experience that in fact will be useful moving ahead? Anyone who would like to respond?
I'll jump in. Certainly, as someone noted, there are far more opportunities for engagement. We've also learned the power of collaboration. Since last summer, we established a task force, which was comprised of subcommittees composed of parents, students, not students, but parents, staff, administration, classified staff, who developed amazing plans and adjusted them along the way as conditions changed. Learned that our government works very slowly. Learned a lot about state leadership, not all necessarily favorable. We've learned what we can accomplish in some regards, and as noted, very quickly under constantly changing conditions. I think we learned a lot about our own personnel in terms of the leadership within our districts being able to step up very quickly, respond, react, implement, monitor a variety of different plans or systems that we've developed. And they did so in many cases having absolutely no break since March 2020. A number of our administrators worked throughout the summer break. And this, this speaks to their dedication. And the same can be said outside of this district as well. As noted, we learned a lot about loud voices and the impact of social media versus the work of educational experts. Panel members here, I would imagine, all have at least 30 years of experience. And that component of social media and loud voices, as Dr. Malloy mentioned earlier, leading by pressure, that was definitely out there. But there's a balance that needs to be considered in terms of lessons learned, in terms of receiving input, but also relying on elected government officials, our school board members, and our educational experts in leading. Talked a little bit about the isolation of superintendents and an outcome or lesson learned in terms of networking within our county and sometimes beyond our county, and the importance of communication. Communication changed significantly in terms of frequency. Another lesson learned in Moraga.
Anyone else like to, what you've learned, what you plan to apply?
I'll jump in with one additional component. I really agree with everything Bruce said as well. The importance of effective and precise communication is something that I've always known is important, but this last year has really helped me think deeply about that. And I'll give you a couple of examples. When there are so many different perspectives and passionate views around a situation, in this case, it was the whole concept of return to school, but we've all experienced other issues as well that are very passionate. And certainly sometimes in our seats, it is difficult to navigate. But I found that as long as I was as candid as I possibly could be, that I repeated whatever messages we were trying to share in as many mediums as I could. As I was honest when we didn't have the answer to something and simply had to wait to figure it out. And I also learned a hard lesson going back to the issue that some have already shared about we weren't in control of some of this. So to speak with too much confidence regarding what was going to come next certainly caused me and our community some challenges as well, because I didn't actually expect, for example, public health always made their decisions on Tuesdays for the following Tuesday. Okay, that's just how it was done for a long time. And then all of a sudden, one Monday in November, everything changed that day for the next. And we had communicated in a certain way, as John Nickerson I mentioned just an hour before, with confidence, that having to dial that one back, when, as we have already shared, there are so many different pieces of information out there, really taught me a lesson about how to be clearer. And when I couldn't actually know what to predict, I was pretty upfront about that as well. So I'll just add that component around the importance of communication, leading to the kind of engagement that Bruce was speaking about.
John or David, don't feel like I have to. We have lots of questions. So
yeah, no, the only thing I would add, I think, is that we have begun jumping on the communication line there with John, is that I've learned personally that probably more important than the communication from me out was opening up the channels for the communication from people in, that if we could allow them the venues to talk about the things that they're frustrated about, and that staff or parents or students, it doesn't really matter, we were able to develop our own external communications going the other direction way more effectively. And frankly, the digital forms of communication in town halls and whatnot served a great purpose in that. And so I anticipate that we will continue with that type of engagement using the digital tools way more effectively than we ever did before.
Yeah, I've been told by a couple of different superintendents and districts that parent engagement has really increased this past year. I mean, certainly having parents in the living rooms working with their children and being able to attend meetings on Zoom and the like. Is that an energy that you can harness moving forward, do you think?
Yeah, I do. And it's not just their willingness to log into meetings, but the level of parent engagement in providing services, engaging other parents, coaching other parents. We had one parent in our PTA who set up a method through which parents could get connected to tutors for their students that could be done remotely. We didn't do that as the district, our PTA did that. And so, just leveraging those folks and empowering everybody to, we're all on the same team, we're all in this together, so let's everybody do our best work. And so the parent engagement was not just about sharing opinions as far as I'm concerned.
So there was a Public Policy Institute of California poll that came out. I was surprised at the percentage of adults in California and public school parents as well, who are really concerned whether or not schools will be open full-time for instruction in the fall. Can you, four of you, give assurances that your districts will be open for business that way in a couple of months?
So we put out our messaging in our community that we are going to be open for in-person instruction in a schedule that looks like our 2019-2020 schedule, full instructional minutes and full programs. What we don't know is some of the restrictions that will be put on us. We are anticipating that masking, certainly indoor masking, will be required. We are not sure yet on distancing. We're planning for 3 feet of distancing, hoping that will be removed, which will take some of the pressure off our master schedule development and things like that. But we are fully planning on opening for in-person instruction. We are planning to have an option for families that want to remain on full remote, but right now we're the deadline to sign up for that is tomorrow. And right now we're seeing just a few families out of our 5,600 that are opting for that. So we expect virtually all of our students will be fully in person.
Yeah, if there's time before we leave, I'd love to explore that virtual option, because maybe other parents in other communities are saying, hey, this worked for me, I'd like to do it in some fashion. But for now, anyone, the others, will you be open for business as pre-pandemic in the fall?
Well, so I'll jump in there. Yes, that's absolutely our intention, and we have put kind of the same caveat that Superintendent Nickerson mentioned, that we don't have complete control over the guidance, but as long as the guidance supports that, we absolutely intend to be open 5 days a week, full days. That's what's best for kids.
And same for us. So I'll just say.
Yeah, same here. We're right now, elementary is following almost a 1920 typical day. and our middle school is back 5 days a week, half day, and we fully intend to move forward as the others have described with a return to 1920 schedules.
Right. So I was interested in what Wesley Smith said about the critical importance of relationship building and engagement with students now more than ever after this past year. And I'm wondering if that's a priority for your districts, and whether or not what the first 6 weeks, whether it's summer school or the fall, might look like to reflect that.
I'll jump in. I actually think it's paramount. I shared before that prior to moving into administration, I'm a school counselor, and I really feel strongly about social emotional wellness and well-being all the time, but in particular now. Some of our kids haven't been on campus for over a year. And even if we think about ourselves as adults, moving into social spaces as things have gotten better, some of us really comfortable with that, others maybe not so much. And we're all trying to kind of figure it out again, because we've sort of been in a whole different space for over a year. That's all of us. And I'm not speaking specifically about students when I say that. And our relationships have changed a bit, at least from my own experience. And so some of our students who have been back on campus now have shared with us that they're tentative, that they've got all kinds of experiences that they may want to share. Some of them aren't interested in sharing it, but they're feeling all kinds of things. And yet we still want to keep those learning conditions that help our kids excel, because that's what, all of our districts are also known for. So we've already started the conversation. We are collaborating with our parents. We are collaborating with our staff and our union leadership to say, we got to balance this. And balancing it means being intentional. Naming that, for example, the first days of summer school, where some of our kids will be back for the first time, have to reflect what we were doing a couple of weeks ago when our kids, some of them, were coming back for the first time. And then, of course, because we're expecting just about everybody in August, let's take some days to really think through, what does it mean to reconnect? What does it mean to provide those learning opportunities that promote that sense of belonging? How do we shift focus so that if we jump right into business as usual, if there are any kids in the community, which I'm sure there are, that need something different, that we don't miss that? And so we're in the process of thinking through that, collaborating about that, thinking about our professional learning sessions for our staff so that we incorporate these key social emotional pieces. And it is a priority from our perspective.
Others comment on that? How will you know on an individual basis where each student is at this point when they come back, both from a mental health standpoint and academically? How do you do that? Because I'm sure districts are no different from others that we've been reading about. There will be a huge difference, disparities among the students in terms of the experience that they've had this past year, then coming back. Anyone?
I'll share. The academic piece and kind of gaps in learning in the last year, in some respects, that's the easier to assess. And we have a lot of tools in place, and we'll be developing new tools to really try to understand if there are critical gaps that will prevent students from moving forward. On the social emotional front, that's a little trickier, and we plan on doing activities in our summer school as well, and in our kind of we're doing a bridge program, kind of an orientation for 9th and 10th graders, and then we'll do things during the school year to help the professionals assess where kids are, and if there are signals being given out by students that indicate more intensive work or more direct work with students to help their adjustment back into school. Particularly, all of our kids have been through trauma, how they respond to that, a year of a pandemic, a year plus of a pandemic, that is trauma on any adolescent, any young kid. How they respond to that, it's going to be very different. And so trying to understand that through kind of informal activities, SEL, instruction, circles, things of that nature will help us determine who needs more intensive and direct services.
I'm interested in particularly with regard to kindergartens. I'm assuming that your district's the enrollment dropped for kindergartners, and how are you going to deal with that when presumably they will be returning, but perhaps in first grade or perhaps in kindergarten again? If you're in first grade, how do you deal with the differences? How do you prepare them for coming back? And then once they're there with first graders and the like, it will be a challenge, I'm assuming.
Yeah, definitely it will be a challenge. I think that kind of building on what Superintendent Nickerson said, there's got to be pre-school, not preschool, but pre-opening of school activities that directly engage not just the students at that age, but also the families at that age. And so as we develop our plans related to the extended learning opportunity grants that are available to us, we have allotted a good deal of energy, and hopefully the funding will follow that, towards SEL re-engagement activities, summer enrichment activities that are not necessarily academically focused, but really geared at trying to reconnect kids to each other and to their school site. And so I'm hopeful that our hard work during the summer and as we ramp up to the beginning of school in August, we'll be able to not just deliver services, but really do some multiple levels of assessment with those students coming back.
And just to be clear, David, are we talking just kindergarten or all students in summer school?
Oh, it's for all students. Okay. We're going to pay particular attention to the kinders and first graders, but also at the middle school level, the sixth graders, the high school, the ninth graders, because those people have never really, up until the past few weeks, been on their campus, and some of them will have not ever been on their campus before. And so it's, you know, as John said, we just have to be thinking differently about the roll up to school. And we need to pull back a little bit on the pressure that we normally do to engage in the learning processes and really focus on the engagement and connection processes first. Because, you know, it's the relationships that teachers build with students that facilitate the learning. I think we all know that. It's also true about the parents. It's the relationships that the parents are able to build with the school site that help support the child in learning outside of the classroom. And so there's a lot of reconnecting that needs to go on. And that will be a key focus in the coming months for us.
Yeah, I'll just share that you know, we've heard about the importance of safety and connectedness. Those absolutely have to be the focus and are necessary components for students prior to them learning. So there needs to remain a focus on that. And we are also looking at increasing counseling and psychological services, as well as providing professional development for our teachers so that they're more aware of potential mental health issues. I'll add, having just visited Catalina and Emery in a kindergarten class at one of our schools the other day, learned that the increased number of students returning to school is selling itself and sending messages to parents who may have some hesitation in sending their kids to school, that school is safe, that they are making connections and learning is part of the instructional day as well. To that point, we're seeing as many as 95% of our students back in school, which is a different set of numbers relative to where we started mid-February with about 70% of our students in school. So slowly but surely, the conditions we are in now are sending messages to parents and others that we can do this safely. And of course, as all the superintendents noted, with a focus on connection, making connections and ensuring multiple layers of protection.
What's your I should ask, is there anyone else want to respond to summer school? Is there anything that you're doing differently this summer than in the past that's worth noting at this point?
Well, in Moraga, we haven't had summer school for at least
Okay.
25 years. So we're venturing into new territory, but we're not just providing an academic component in math and English language arts, as I think some of the others noted. We are going to have counseling services with a focus on SEL, which is maybe not the kind of additional programming you might find in a pre-COVID summer school program. So that's a significant and important difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think the message all from many people is don't go back to a traditional summer school after having gone through this experience over the past year. So what are your priorities for the next year? And we'll get to spending in a minute, but sort of what's your North Star for the next year in terms of making up for the disparities of learning that you'll find and well, the like, what, as you envision the next year, how might it be different?
I'll jump in on that because it connects, I think, to the conversation that just happened as well, that whenever there are challenges like we faced, looking for the opportunities around what could be better going forward is something I think is really important for us to consider. And, you know, for decades, we've talked about personalizing learning and ensuring that we are connecting learning to students' interests, strengths, passions, as well as their needs. And we sometimes focus, I think, so much on student need, which I don't want to ignore, that we might miss kind of how we connect with our kids in such a way that they are really engaged at that level. So we talked about personalized learning, we understand what it is, but then when we look more deeply at where it's happening and how it's happening, I think that we have found that that's not always the case. So being really specific. We love that our educators do amazing work with our students. We appreciate that the standards and expectations are high, and we're grateful that our kids, for the most part, do so very well. But when we talk about the love of learning, when we talk about the curiosity of learning, the engagement of learning, when we do different surveys and such, we don't get the same response. Similarly, taking it to the next level, we ask our kids if they feel like they've got a caring adult in the community, someone that they can turn to. We don't always hear that. Do they think their teachers and their staff care about them? Yes. Do they think that the staff have high expectations for their success? Yes. We look at the social emotional pieces in the data we have collected even prior to the pandemic. We don't always see the level of connection, that level of engagement, that level of love of learning, along with the high expectations and standards that I think are really important going forward. So I think this is going to be a catalyst for us to say we can't do it as we used to do it. We all get why. There's no need to ignore what's gone on. And so let's be really intentional about it. Let's figure out what it looks like, sounds like, and let's embed it in our professional learning. Let's support it through counseling services and social work in particular. And then let's monitor it over the next year to see, so what's changed, what impact has it had, and how might it continue to inform us moving forward? So just a few thoughts from my perspective on that.
Thank you. Others? So one of the things that I've heard, a couple of things that I've heard stressed several times would be tutoring as for example, high intensity tutoring as one option that a lot of folks, a lot of professional educators, professors are advocating as a strategy moving ahead. Another one is building partnerships with nonprofits so that you can extend the day, even if you're not doing it now. What do you think about tutoring in particular? Is that on your horizon? Okay.
So John, I'll jump in there, I guess. I think that there are a lot of families who are looking for tutoring support for their students, and so it certainly will be something that we advocate for within our plan moving forward. The trick for me is that really I'm concerned about, and it relates to tutoring, so I'm not going down a rabbit hole, trust me, but I'm concerned about trying to build back the confidence in the community. Because I think this year has shaken everybody to their core. I know it shook me. And I know it's shaken our teachers because they've had to try things they've never been asked to do before. And parents were put in the position of having to be teachers at home, and they've never had to do that before. And so I really want to focus on rebuilding the confidence and connectedness within the community. And I think tutoring is one step to help build a student's confidence back. Professional development is one step for upbuilding a teacher's confidence related to the things they've gone through this year. Parenting programs are one step in building back the confidence of the parent community. So I'm thinking about it less about tutoring and more about connectedness and confidence building.
And John, I'll add, I want to echo what David's saying. I think that's absolutely true, but a little different angle on the tutoring piece. We will have some tutoring programs that we'll be offering for students outside of the school day. But what we found in the past when we've done that is the students who tend to take advantage of that are not the students that we're most concerned about. They're the students that are at that B+ and really want to get up to the A-. And while we support that 100%, we're concerned about a different set of of students. So one of the things that we have an academy structure within our school day. So it's within the school day, and we just need to get better about really targeting the students in that academy so that they're getting the extra support. And the other piece, even more so, is the professional development of our teachers so that they can use their class time for interventions and kind of those tier 1 in the class interventions to support the students with the learning gaps. And that's a challenging thing to do when you've got 30 kids in your classroom. How do you individualize it? But it can be done. It is done. And we just need to work to build our teachers' capacity so they're more equipped to do so that that learning loss is being addressed in the classroom, perhaps in academy, but we're not depending on students to show up after school, before school, in the evenings for tutoring to fill that gap.
Yeah, I know there's talk about perhaps tapping into retired teachers who perhaps can do this as in that role. Is that a possibility for that you're considering? Yeah. So a month from now, districts are supposed to do something called the Extended Learning Opportunity Grant Template. It's a mouthful. What it says is how you're going to spend the $4.6 billion that the state has allocated in one-time money, actually available over several years. And I know that's part of $35 billion that coming to the state. And before you jump up and say, that's not us, it's true. And I think people need to realize that, and we at EdSource certainly throw around that figure, but it is largely based on poverty and English learners. So that, and I looked at your, I looked at how much we ran a database which gave how per student in each district, and it's in the hundreds for all of the districts, and that's a reflection of the low percentage of poverty and low income students. Most of this money will be allocated based on Title I and the local control funding formula, which is weighted towards low income students and English learners and homeless kids and foster kids. So it's not going to be $5,000 per student, which is a statewide average, and it's not going to be $11,000 per student, which is what LA Unified expects to get. But there is money, and I'm wondering how you plan to use it.
John, this is Bruce. First, thank you for that important recognition.
I figured if I didn't, you would. So yeah.
Appreciate the homework. There are some disparities out there. I want to segue from your prior question about tutoring and answer the question. Yes, we are looking to our retired folks. And part of the Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant is looking at existing successful programs. This is what we're doing right now. While engaging our employees and our parents, which is part of the ELO Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant, for their input as well. So we're looking at our existing research-based effective tutoring programs and looking for opportunities to expand them. So that is an example of some programming that we're looking to implement via ELO, including the summer school program I talked about, additional counseling services, psych services, mental health training for staff. And I just want to concur with the prior comments that part of this as well is building capacity through professional development of our general ed or classroom teachers, so they have more tools in their toolbox to meet the needs of students.
So, superintendents, how do you plan to spend the grant that you're supposed to say by June 1st? And well, I won't be mean. It's kind of a trick question because that's supposed to be based on your contact with your community that happens between now and June 1st. But and I don't know whether it's happening yet. But how do you plan to reach out to your community and discuss what the priority should be? And at this point, what would you expect your priorities for using this money and the larger federal money, if any of it's coming to you over the next number of years?
So I can jump in. Okay, go ahead, Dave.
No, go ahead, John. I'll go after you.
So we're in the throes of this right now. We are collaborating with our union colleagues. We are reaching out to our staff, students, and our parents through some logical means to get their insights and perspectives. And we're getting really good insights into where we should focus. So there's great ideas. And the good news is they're pretty aligned too. So I'll speak about that really quickly in a minute, but I think, John, you did set this up properly, that from my seat, and are going to do bringing some of this information into our boardroom with our trustees next week. But my biggest concern is the dollars aren't necessarily as large in our communities as people might assume without looking at it. And because numbers are being thrown around, the expectations are immense. And then the other concern we always deal with, because in my experience, especially when we're trying to reconnect after a year like this one, yes, we do need the professional focus, and we will. And yes, we might need some resources, and we can purchase them. But what we really need are people. We need professionals, educators, counselors, things of that nature. And yet, because of the nature of the dollars, we also don't want to raise the expectations so high and then not be able to sustain that staffing level a year or two down the road. So that's another piece that we're trying to be really upfront about, because the truth is, I feel strongly that we need to hire additional staff to assist us with the learning issues, with the wellness issues, and that's what I'm going to be bringing forward. And I've been saying that publicly wherever I go. But there are concerns about it too, as I've mentioned. So Dave, over to you. Those are a few thoughts from San Ramon.
Yeah, I would concur with your statement about needing staff and the difficulty that the one-time nature of the dollars presents to that mechanism, because we can make all kinds of promises and deliver all kinds of supports. And then in a year and a half, we're pulling those supports back because there's no funding to support them. So it's tough. And we've been engaging our stakeholder groups, various stakeholder groups in various town hall sessions related to the grant opportunities and how we should prioritize those funds in the kind of the 7 buckets that were presented in the template. And so our parents have had an opportunity to weigh in. Our PTA leaders have all had an opportunity to weigh in separately. We've had high school students, middle school students weighing in. We've had our classified staff members weighing in, and our leadership teams weighing in, and they're all writing into a common template so they can see the ideas that are being placed by other people. And we are taking a summary of those requests, so to speak, or ideas to the board on the 6th for their first review of it. And that will be their opportunity to give input. So we're deep into that process, and it's resulting in a lot of common thought around the issues. So I'm pleased about that part.
Yeah, and the common thought, how would you sum that up?
Well, student supports, mental health, support for teachers, and staff, including mental health focus for the teachers, increased staffing, so counselors, social workers, and the extended learning opportunities available to help kids kind of get back to where they need to be, and get reconnected to the schools. I would say those are kind of the big bucket items.
Yeah. John, do you have priorities for that money? John Nickerson?
Yeah, so, we're in the midst of a process and on this, but some of the areas that we see it going, a lot into professional development and just the demands through teachers on special assignment that will be leading as teacher leaders, making our wellness centers at each of our campuses a little bit more robust with some additional staffing and having them more active during the summer. Bringing in additional paraprofessionals. As you know, 10% of these dollars need to be spent on paraprofessionals. And we think having additional adults with some training can really benefit our students. We are expanding our summer school significantly and rethinking our summer school, which we talked a little bit about before. And so some dollars will likely go there. Class size reduction, and that's kind of hitting two issues. One, allowing us to build a full master schedule with the 3 feet separation, but also we believe a slightly smaller classroom community will help teachers better connect with students better connect with each other, and make kind of individualized instruction and intervention a little bit more feasible for a teacher. So those are some of the big buckets that we're looking at.
Yeah, I guess extending the school year, extending the school day, weekends, that's all option. I mean, summer school as well is part of it. Anyone, I mean, LA got a lot of headlines for saying we're going to extend the school year to 2 weeks, part of which was a teacher training. But anyone thinking about adding days in any fashion during the next year or two?
That has not come up as an interest with our folks.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll just add that I think it's also important to note that depending upon how people have experienced this year, summer school may not be the answer for everyone. They might just need space. Kids might just need time to step back. Families might need some time to re-engage differently. Some kids do need to be there, and we're going to be there for them. But the whole notion of the extra time and the extra days, all of that takes, if we look at, the evidence around tutoring, the evidence around extensions of time and space, that all takes some pretty deliberate planning, and it takes some pretty deliberate steps forward that, I'm going to put it out there. I think, David, you said it at the beginning. We've only got so much brain space at this moment, and that's not an excuse. We've only got so much energy at this time, and we want to think as creatively as we can. We want to lean in as far as we can, but we also need to say to our staff, you got to disconnect a little bit. We want to say to our families, we're going to be there for you this summer for those of you who need it. But some of you, if you don't need to be there because you want to do something different for you to rejuvenate and renew, please do it. And let's come back together in August for those who don't choose the summer option in a way that allows us to really, not be business as usual, but still hold the high standards. We kind of figure all that out together. That's my goal in San Ramon, is to just figure out how do we keep bringing our parents and our students and our staff around tables, whether they be virtual or certainly, hopefully soon, physical presence tables, and just keep doing this work collaboratively. That's just some thoughts in relationship to this whole notion of strategies we might use in the short term.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think that that's really important to say in terms of meeting people's needs and their need for time off. And I've heard that. I mean, I'm sure all of you feel the urgency, but just more is not necessarily better at this point. Yeah, John, I'm particularly interested in your experience in Toronto, how it might inform this. And the reason is, we know there's not much of a state support system in California. You're not going to turn to the state and expect to get answers particularly, and you're not necessarily, we don't have a system set up of county help. And that's why I was interested to hear Bruce and others talk among yourselves. But I'm just interested, John, since Toronto as a province was recognized as one of the best systems in the world, if the pandemic, or maybe you know what's going on in Toronto, if this had been a pandemic here, what would the response have been from a provincial that we're not getting from a state? And how is it that the state of California or the counties or whatever, can we create a system so that when you're looking at, for example, Bruce was mentioning tutoring, that you know where the best practices are, and you don't have to reinvent everything on your own, despite the much heralded local control. You don't have to go through that process. There's some help you can turn to. And I'm interested in anyone's response, but particularly the Toronto experience, John.
Well, certainly I'll offer an insight that I think the impacts of the pandemic have had really similar reactions and experiences for the communities in Ontario and in Toronto in particular. And unfortunately, Ontario and Toronto right now are in a pretty rough spot. I do speak with my colleagues there regularly, and they're back in another spike. So unfortunately, everything is quite closed down again, and nothing is open and such. And unfortunately, they're in that extreme spot we were in January. Right now speaks to something we have to kind of keep paying attention to related to this really difficult pandemic. But there is one big change, and I'm thrilled to be here in California. I made the choice to be here. I'm originally from Ohio and always planned to come back to the States. So I'm not saying this in a critical way, but what is different about the California context to the Ontario context is that the provincial government, the state government, to use our terms, did take more control over what the decisions are. You all will open. You all will be closed. You all will offer a hybrid fashion or model. And you will be sure that even when you're back in school, you have this type of virtual option, for example. And then the funding that goes along with it when they're directing the actions is very explicit as well. What makes that different for a superintendent is, even though you might find yourself, as I did when I was there, in a place of advocacy, if I agreed or didn't agree, or my board of trustees agreed or didn't agree, the one difference is we didn't have that authority. And they still don't have that authority. And so I found that sometimes, as I learned how to lead in our California context, there are times when I really appreciate the local control, the local autonomy, unless I don't have all the tools, I don't have the authority over the information, nor do I have the influence over the regulations. So then it's kind of like you've given local authority with our board, but I don't really have it. If that is something, if I'm making sense. And that's the part that is, I reach out to my colleagues who are on this and saying, can you help me? And John Nickerson will start laughing, because I'd say, can you help me understand how you do this? Because we're supposedly in charge, but we don't have all the tools. Answer your question as respectfully as I can. That's the big, I wouldn't have been driving some of the things in my district in Toronto that I'm expected with our board to drive here. But so I'll let the other panelists share their experiences. And I hope bringing a little bit of the Ontario, Toronto into this conversation has helped somewhat.
You know, well, back a number of years ago, everyone was taking trips to Toronto through the core district, and I guess maybe you've met some of the people from across the country. The place to go, like 10 years ago, was Toronto, and we had.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to come to California is over the 10 years I was a superintendent there, I probably met 40 superintendents from California because they would come on study tours every single year, John, as you said. And I really appreciated all those connections that I made in the Toronto space with the California context.
Yeah.
This is Bruce. I just want to go back to a comment I made earlier in terms of lessons learned. I made a few general comments about government moving slowly and some comments about state leadership. And John, I just want to thank you, because what you just described is the crescendo of what we encountered this year, and you captured it brilliantly, because that is the the point of our challenge or challenges we face this year. So I just wanted to extend my appreciation for communicating that. Thank you.
Is there anything that the state could be, I mean, ideally, when you try and come up with plans for the use of this, is there anything, are you just turning to each other, or who do you turn to figure out whether what you're going to do will be an effective use of the money? And of course, from a parent standpoint, we have a plan that's due in June, but after that, there's no particular obligation to report back to the community to see how it's working or to see where you want to shift. Do you feel that responsibility to do that and update and go back and inform the community that, yeah, we tried this and it didn't quite work, so we're shifting now?
So yes, I would say that's a critical step for our process. We've been describing the plan as a construction of buckets that will identify ideas that we would like to walk forward, but we're also, acknowledging the fact that some of those ideas may or may not be fleshed out. And what the state plan requires is that we identify how we might spend those dollars, but it doesn't lock us into those. If they end up not being needed or not effective, we can pivot. But I think stakeholder engagement within that process is really, really important.
Well, I suppose one of the problems is to build up expectations too, because this is short-term money, as you said, and it's not going to solve your class reduction problem. And so there may be, I mean, particularly if everyone thinks that all of you are getting $5,000 per student, and you're not, but it is one-time money. And although I have heard that there are ways that you can, I'll write about it if it's so, you can extend that money as far as 2028, 29, I've been told. And that there are ways to do that, at least with the federal money, not the state money. Someone mentioned to me that, actually, it was a student we were talking about, a high school student who said, well, I like distance learning in some respects, and it would be great next year if we could go back, and I want to go back in the class, but maybe that's one day a week that we stay at home, we do study at home, we have small group meetings, we have tutorials, we have conversations with our teacher remotely, and you can't do that now. And I'm wondering, I don't think you can do that when you go back. I don't think the Ed Code would allow that situation the way it is. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just wondering if any of you think that there needs to be a change in Ed Code to allow you to have the flexibility and to try new things that you feel you can't do now.
So absolutely, there needs to be more flexibility in the Ed Code to allow us to be creative and to really follow the leadership of our teachers, who, not just our students, but our teachers, who know what's best for kids and know what's best for themselves as well, in terms of training and having time to look at data and whatnot. So I do think that there's opportunities to think about scheduling differently, but you're absolutely correct that the Ed Code does not currently provide an opportunity for us to do that.
Anything in particular that you would like to see change, David?
Well, sure. A blended learning environment where students come in on different days for different things. There's a whole lot of ways that it could be done. There's for some students in particular, I'm thinking about a teacher back in Riverside who was teaching with our virtual school, but she also taught at the comprehensive high school. And she had an AP biology class, but she knew that not all the kids needed to be sitting with her every single day. So she asked if she could move that AP biology class to 0 period and do it remotely, but have kids come in based on needs. So if they came in for wet labs, they always came in for that. Kids that were struggling came in every day of the week, but kids that were making adequate progress and doing what they needed to do, they didn't need to get up and come into school for that class unless it was a lab day. So we could do that because it was an extra period, so it didn't contribute to the accounting of attendance. But we had to account for attendance. And if we didn't have to deal with that issue, we could be far more creative with how we engage students and teachers in the learning process.
That's interesting. Anyone else know about any changes in the Ed Code that might help make your job easier looking ahead?
I'll kind of echo what David's saying. You know, looking at this as we're thinking about options for next year and thinking about what any change in law might allow and might not allow, I would say that distance learning, as we've executed it this year, and I think all 4 of our districts did a superb job with the distance learning, you know, relative to what I've seen elsewhere. But I don't think that's the model that we're looking for. It's something more creative, innovative. It's really a blend. We all think it's good for kids to be on campus interacting with their peers live, but could there be something to allow that flexibility so you could develop a program like David described, and particularly at different points in education, you know, senior year versus 9th grade, it might be a little different in terms of what might be best for most kids. So I would love to see the flexibility in the ed code so that you could design and create with accountability different types of programs rather than the pure instructional minutes in a seat, or the accountability with independent study, things like that, but really get creative and rethink what education can be. It would be troubling to me if we just created law that allowed us to have 30% of the public education students in the state of California are continuing on a distance learning like we've seen it this year, because I don't necessarily think that's the right model.
And if I could just pick up where John is, when I arrived here last July and our meetings in my cabinet were filled with the conversation around instructional minutes, I learned something that was new to me. The amount of times we as senior people talk about instructional minutes and the amount of time that it actually influences our practice was a new learning. And as we've gone through this year, I want to pick up on the ideas that were shared around creativity. And I'm going to lean into a pretty challenging example. We weren't in hybrid long before we were able to move into the full-time instruction. And our educators, our teachers, our staff members, they did a great job as far as concerned in digital remote stuff. And they also did when we were in a hybrid for a short period of time. I think they did an amazing job. But something emerged pretty quickly from our students, from our staff, and from our parents, that the concept of asynchronous, not being with your teacher, perceived as unstructured and not accountable, as opposed to creative ways to invite kids into some really deep learning tasks. Maybe they worked collaboratively with their classmates, whether the teacher was there or not. There was this belief that it was less than. And we got into some challenges around that the only strategy was video conferencing. Well, video conferencing is something we're using in many of our cases, but not all. Some other districts chose to do that throughout. Video conferencing can be amazing, or depending upon the balance of who's in the school and who's not in the school, if it's not done properly, you can. I'm going with this is that we really, I think, could go down a creative road for some kids who really would have been really well served in asynchronous. They don't want independent, even though that's an amazing program too. And we have a program here in San Ramon that serves some kids, but they were looking for something else. And I almost we could have, and I know as I say this, some of my parent leaders who are here might disagree with me. I almost wish that we could have practiced a little longer to figure out what learned could be, because if the ed code would give us some flexibility, if we could start with some of the kids who really would be well served that way, and that we try a little bit more to see how we serve some of our students in a synchronous and an asynchronous space, not for everybody, but for some. That's a creativity that with how things are done with instructional minutes and attendance and such just gets a lot more complicated. So I offer that as a practical reality, and I'll state it. I mean, our hybrid model wasn't well loved, and it did cause us a lot of tension. And we didn't, as I said, do it long enough for us to gain any lessons on it.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, John. And John Nickerson, I noticed that you are offering independent study, and you also have a virtual academy, I think, or at least you're looking into it. I'm not sure, but that's sort of two separate. That's sort of not what quite what John has talked about. And then is there looking for some way, perhaps you can take a second to explain the difference between the independent study and the virtual academy, and might there be a creative way to combine them for those students who would want that? And it may be, 10%, 20%, but I think there's a great deal of worry that among some districts that if you don't offer something, these parents may go to charters and they may go elsewhere.
So our virtual academy is not purely defined yet, but it is, what is defined is it's seen as a one-year program for not necessarily families who said distance learning kind of worked. We think we liked it. It's for the families where either the student has a health condition or somebody in the household has a health condition, and that puts them at unique risk if a student is coming to campus. So we designed it as kind of a stopgap program, and it very well might be kind of blended in with the independent study, yet a purely remote option, an independent study. That's yet to be determined. But I think what we would love the flexibility to do is long-term kind of rethink education. And if the Ed Code allowed the flexibility to create kind of these blended learning opportunities that, maybe students are in the school building for a good part of the day, but then doing some things independently or through remote support. So the virtual academy, we've kind of defined some basic parameters, 1 year for a particular audience, as we work our way through the pandemic.
I see. And is that with the assumption that the state may either encourage or require that districts provide this as an alternative for those students who cannot return as opposed to don't want to return?
Yeah, it's the assumption that some of our families will need that. And
yeah,
but then in terms of whether the state requires it, that's kind of a different factor in what they'll require
okay,
as we look at this.
Yeah. And Bruce, can you relate to any of this at an elementary school level, or is this really a high school construct?
No, we're definitely can relate to it. We're already in discussions now as a consortium, if you will, within the Walla-Miranda school districts. We're also looking at the county for support in terms of possibly continuing some sort of virtual educational opportunity next school year. So those discussions are having, but I'm really glad you asked the question, because what you heard from the superintendents was a discussion that is very timely, might be a future topic to write about, and sort of taking a 10,000 foot look at all of this. And as a silver lining in terms of what we experienced the past year is a discussion about moving away from, or in addition to, the more traditional learning environment, more creative learning opportunities. That's what your question has sort of focused on, and that question is unique for this time. And my concern is that we lose this opportunity to take advantage of what everybody just described in more creative opportunities relative to different kinds of learning programs. Someone earlier talked about more personalized instruction. Here's the opportunity. Had this not happened, we may not be having this discussion. And I do hope our state leadership through different organizations look at the same question and don't lose momentum that's been generated in terms of some great ideas that have come from successful programming the past year, where superintendents and school boards might continue those in some capacity in the near future while still offering a more traditional program.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not sure where that discussion starts. I don't hear it in Sacramento now. It's more along the lines of, tuition and ADA and questions like that. And I don't know whether it would be more of a foundation supported that then you go seek an exemption from the State Board of Education, but it's certainly worth looking at the options, because I think people are at this moment in time thinking there must be or can be ways of doing things differently.
And
So,
John, if I could just jump in,
Yeah.
because there's a really significant question in the chat that just popped up around, can we eliminate asynchronous learning because students consider it a day off? That, I think, is the transformative conversation we need to have. So let me be practical. If an asynchronous day is just the teacher assigned homework that the kid does at home the next day, then that's not what I'm saying.
yeah,
What I'm saying is that even that in an asynchronous schedule, and when we think about our older kids getting ready for life after us, I mean, I've said this publicly a number of times, especially for our 11th and 12th graders. Lots of college is asynchronous, where the kids are expected to do a ton of work, and the work is really meaningful, and it takes numerous days, and it kind of then allows the teacher to engage at different times and spaces. So in other words, the learning task is complex, the learning task is extended, there's oftentimes need for collaboration, so that you get that whole student voice and engagement thing going on. There's accountability along the way, there's feedback along the way, and it's pretty tough. And so that's very different than what some people thought asynchronous means. And truthfully, we didn't have enough time to support our staff. It's not their fault. I don't think we actually even got into it to the way that you're hearing me speak now, because we just didn't have the time or the energy or the brain space. So I wouldn't want this pandemic year where we tried some asynchronous to mean we can't go back and try it again. So that's number one. And number two, I'm not saying it's for everybody. The pandemic made it kind of be everybody's concern. I'd like to try it with those who really hear what I'm saying and the others are saying and want it. See, that's a whole different story. It's not you have to do it. It's just that when people hear it described, just like independent study, some people push there, and we are going to continue to offer it, and we want to offer it. I would just like to see this being done for those who want it, and then over time we might be able to perfect it and make it even that much more meaningful for others to consider. So I wanted to respond because I saw that in the chat.
you know, actually, John, I'm not seeing that. Are there questions? We have time for questions, and I'm not seeing that answers. Am I missing some questions that we can ask here?
That was the only one that popped up that I can see. So
Okay, I haven't gotten many. There is time, still a couple minutes for folks who want to ask questions. There are a couple, and there's a long question. Let me see if I can boil this down. How can districts, I think it goes back to what we've talked a little bit about. How can districts increase engagement and resources allocation for those groups who are not currently and are not likely to participate or speak up? Yeah, any thoughts on that? I guess it's how you engage your students, what you figure out, particularly I was a parent in distance learning where it was often difficult to know exactly where students were. Okay.
I'll just share.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
John, one thing that we learned very early in the pandemic, and I want to say in March of last year, is we weren't communicating with our students enough. And we were communicating with our parents a whole lot, but not with our students enough. And so that's one of the early lessons learned, and we'll try to continue that, reaching out to the students directly and getting their opinion on things, because one thing we also discovered is the students' opinions often differed wildly from their parent opinions. And it's not that both don't have a value in informing a district as it moves forward, but certainly listening to the kids helps us try to address all needs.
Can you give an example, John, where you got a really good insight from
Well,
students?
let's look at kind of what Dr. Malloy was talking about with the asynchronous and synchronous, and the value in the asynchronous learning. We were hearing from parents that it was it was a day off for everybody, including our teachers, which was not true. But it was, what we were hearing from the kids was not so much that there was value in it. It was just a different type of learning. So That's just one simple example that we learned through surveys back in the fall.
Yeah.
And if I could just, John,
Sure.
briefly comment on, I think the importance of our equity work is that we're creating the conditions for all voices to influence, and that we accept the fact maybe some of our voices, whether they're staff voices, parent voices, student voices, don't always know how to do that. And it's our job to create the conditions for that. And so one of the things that I ask at every meeting, and when our cabinet team is meeting, it's the basis of the discussion. And when we're working with our principals, we ask the feedback, which is, who aren't we hearing from? And how might you gain insight from them? Because we do want to hear from everybody. And I'm grateful for those who know how to navigate whichever systems, town hall, emails, other means to ensure their voice is being heard and that their influence is being offered. But I think it's our job as leaders to create the conditions and to reach out where we may not be hearing that different perspective, and then providing some assistance so that that voice, that perspective also is communicated and is influencing our decision making.
Thank you. Interesting. David, in knowing your interest in technology, I mean, what practices have you seen either that your teachers have learned or that you've seen that you can incorporate that in the classroom moving ahead?
So really the integration of technology into the curriculum, training that was done over the summer has really helped teachers kind of leap ahead from where they were last school year. And so there's a lot of blended learning mechanisms that they've been engaging. We've seen some, although I do not want to continue concurrent learning, we've seen some incredible examples of teachers who've figured out how to communicate at the same time with people who are in the room and who are at home. And again, I don't want to keep doing that, but we learned that those teachers were able to figure out how to make that happen. And that may have some play in how we deal with students that have to go on home hospital, as an example. And so we're trying to learn small things like that. We've talked a little bit already today about the larger concept of blended learning as it applies to asynchronous time. But I think we've gotten more people comfortable, more teachers comfortable, and frankly, more parents and students comfortable with the idea that I don't have to be sitting in a classroom to continue learning, which starts to beg the question of how could we use time during the school day to support internships for our older high school students or other real world work opportunities or learning opportunities that take a student's backside out of a chair when the state only gives us funding for when the backside is in the chair. So that we have to make this choice between full-time seat-based instruction or independent study. And a lot of people don't really get that independent study paper-based is the same thing if you have a virtual school. It's an onerous record-keeping possibility. And so I think as we move more stakeholders, including our teachers and our parents, into a level of understanding about the value of those types of opportunities, it's going to help us move our legislators.
Do you think this might be able to expand dual enrollment with community colleges?
Oh, yeah.
That presents an opportunity.
Absolutely. We do that already, and I think everybody else probably does that has high schools. But it's when you start to be able to kind of crack that connection between the amount of time a person's in a seat and how the person is demonstrating mastery or competency of their learning skills, it starts to enable you not just to break that seat-based attendance issue, but also does it take 185 days or 180 days for a student to learn algebra? And I would posit that it doesn't. It takes some 150 and some 215, but it's never everybody doing it at the same time, and yet that's how our system is structured. So if we could break the links between the Carnegie unit, UC's entrance requirements and whatnot, and the ed code related to how we track attendance and are funded, there's no stopping the creativity that could come out of the public school system, which, by the way, and I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole again, but guess who can do those kind of things? Charter schools get the opportunity to do those things, and public comprehensive schools do not.
Yeah.
So at the very least, legislators give us the flexibility that you already give to charter schools.
Yeah, you mentioned this is a topic for another day, but that the framework for math is being proposed. And one of the things is that they're discouraging offering Algebra 1 before 9th grade, which you go way back to the math, which is the exact opposite. But it struck me as the irony of it that now you're in a position to do competency-based learning, and now we're prescribing something for all districts to do, is what gets to your point.
Yep.
I see Nasser's here in the 2-minute warning. If
Yep.
any of you have anything, final thoughts that we didn't talk about, and apologies if I didn't raise them. Well, I've enjoyed very much talking this conversation, and I hope others listening did as well. Thank you very much for doing this today.
Really
Nasser,
appreciate it,
turn it to you.
John. Thank you so much. My left hand is trying to keep my right finger away from the mouse, and just so like not interrupt you guys, so I can continue listening to this fascinating discussions and learn about more. But unfortunately, for us and you, that you have other things to do. So I really appreciate you joining, Dr. John Nickerson, Bruce, Dave, Dr. Malloy. Really appreciate and enjoyed these conversations. We're so impressed with hearing your comments and responses and plans moving forward. Especially the silver lining for me is particularly hearing that we are not thinking of a puzzle pieces that fell apart and we are scrambling it back together again with the same exact pictures and the same exact shape and views. Instead, this past year has helped us to learn, based on what I heard, based on what you're saying, is the creativity, the personalized labeling, the collaborations, that knowing how the government slow action and reaction works, the importance of precise communications, managing loud voices and social media pressure, learning about our team and staff and parents engaging. So we can build a better picture from ground up rather than putting the same picture back together. This is very impressive. This is very important. And I think this is really in line with our model as far as going forward with resiliency. By the way, we are among us, we are labeling you as the battle-worn warriors, and so happy while you're so tired, but not bruised. So great that you guys are still in shape and smiling. So again, thanks for joining. And by the way, we feel that you all deserve serious awards and recognitions, and not just a Starbucks gift card for $5. So in closing, I want to reemphasize that it would be so hard to see more than a few days into the future of the students and their schools in the midst of unprecedented crisis. So true if we would continuously look in a rear view mirror. But as you elaborated, as you clarified, but we are not, we are instead looking forward, and with your leadership and with your directions, we are moving forward with resiliency. What you're hoping today for our audience and for our participant, that what we have done and what we have assembled, a group of specialists and experienced and professional leaders such as yourself, to complement our own personal and family gained experiences throughout this year, and the lesson learned during this crisis, and then learn and navigate how to go and moving forward with resiliency. I want to thank Screen, I want to thank Dr. Smith and all of you guys for again participating, and for attendees, please rejoin us this evening at 6 o'clock. We have another wonderful and very informative sessions on social emotional issues of the students, as well as equity panels that we are discussing. So again,
Thank you for that summary, Nasser. Much appreciated.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. You guys have a great day.